This is just the mic check. We don't start for another 15 minutes. But I am trying to see. Check. Mic check. I'm texting my wife to see if she can hear me. Check, mic check. Shalon, can you hear me? Check. Can anybody hear me? Is my microphone coming through? Just make sure this is all working. This is still mic check. We start at 7. Christy Krosick, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, great. So I think the sound is coming through. We should be starting in about 14 minutes. Great. Starting in 14 minutes. Just if you hadn't noticed, it's a little dark because I'm in my basement. And the reason why is because I have 3 boys, and I'm guessing that in the middle of my lesson, you don't want to hear 2 teenagers argue about who gets the last batch of kettle chips, which is a ridiculous argument because clearly I get the last batch of kettle chips. Nice. All right. We will start in 13 minutes, peoples. And yes, in my basement because it's too noisy upstairs. I have 3 teenage sons, and it would probably be too distracting to see them like in the background, bumping heads, fighting over the last can of Pringles. So, hello, Tara. It's good to see y'all. So, I'll be able to see comments until I start. And then when I start, I can't see them because it doesn't scroll up. Just an FYI. Oh, just a little quick side note for you early birds. At 5:02, at 5 minutes 2, it's 6:55. I'm going to tell 2 jokes. They will not be good ones, but it's just a little bonus for people that tune in a little early. 2 jokes. I know you can hardly believe your luck. All right. Just getting all my I's dotted and T's crossed. Let's see. All right. 12 minutes to start, peoples. 12 minutes to start. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Please don't have big expectations for these jokes. You'll only hurt yourself. It's a beautiful day today. Nice weather. Although you can't tell by the dark background that I'm in. Yep, that's what you get when you get 3 teenage boys. You have to hide out. I know you guys are so impressed with how tech I went. You're like, man, this is what I signed up for. When I joined Detroit Church, you thought, man, we are cutting edge. That the minister's going to hold up a piece of paper that says 10 minutes. I had some problems trying to get it up there. I can't explain it right now. But that's why I did that piece. I want to do something, some kind of marker. I'll be back. All right. In the 2 minutes that I went to get a cup of tea, did everybody leave? Everybody figure this was their time to. All right. We will be starting in 8 minutes, people. 8 minutes. And lest I remind you here, in 3 minutes, you get the early bird jokes. Yes. 5-2 at midweeks. I'm telling a couple jokes. They're not good ones. So don't, it's better to have no expectations. All right, 7 minutes and counting. You know me, I like to be precise when it comes to punctuality. My basement's so cold that I initially started this lesson wearing a jacket, a winter jacket. I kid you not. Right behind me. All right. Appreciate the feedback. I can read stuff before and after my lesson, not during, but yeah, we're trying to continue to tinker and improve. I think this next coming Sunday might be a little bit of a step down because of stricter quarantine rules in Michigan now, so I might not be able to get as much help, but we'll see. We'll figure it out, people. It's all good. It's all good. Well, what I really appreciate about this this Facebook live forum is that Illumity Faulkner and Greg Johnson can't hear all the junk I'm going to say about them because we know they're never going to go on this. All right, here we go. In case you missed how high-tech this was, check this out. See what I did right there? I used a piece of paper to indicate that there's 5 minutes left. I guarantee you I'm going to get half of my staff and my zone leaders complaining to me about how lame that was. But that's okay. That's okay. Anyways, it's 5-2. We're not starting yet, but I want to tell you guys two dumb jokes. The first one is, so the other day I walked into a Roman bar and I held up 2 fingers and they gave me 5 drinks. Anyways, and here's my other joke. I don't always tell dad jokes, but when I do, he laughs. That was it. Anyways, I'll be starting my lesson in 4 minutes. Okay, 4 minutes. Starting in 4 minutes. 1 second. Feedback, Amber Nazimic commented that she thought my jokes were excellent. I noticed that she was the only one. It's all right. It's all right. I can take negativity. Anyways, we are going to start in 3 minutes, gang. Oh, Greg Johnson's on. Good thing I was talking about the other Greg Johnson, Greg Frederick Johnson. We've got 3 Johnsons in our church. We've got Sean and Sandy Johnson. We have Greg and Sue Johnson. And there's another Greg Frederick Johnson and his wife Sally. Starting in 2 minutes, gang. 2 minutes. Starting in a minute. All right, let's get started. Before I get into my lesson, I wanted to just give some family news specific to the Detroit church. Wanted to let us know that we announced on Sunday that Praveen Cherian's father had passed, as well as Rachel Tampin's mother. So if we can keep those families in our prayers, I certainly know what it's like to lose a parent, as I lost one last year, as several of us did. So let's be keeping Praveen Cherian and Rachel Tampin in our prayers. And I'm also, I believe the deaths of their parents were not related to COVID-19, but nevertheless, they're obviously, so let's keep them in ours. And we'll pray at the very end of this. So, but anyways, let's start. So I'm going to start a series called Brain Train. I want to talk about training our minds to be more godly. There are lots of impediments to a godly mindset. There's temptation, there's worry, there's negativity, fear, anger, pain. Honestly, the list goes on. And once we start to go down this path, we start to become imprisoned in our unspiritual thinking, and we start to believe that's who we are. That's just how we think. I want to start off this series by talking about, firstly, the definition of training, giving a definition. Training, the process of taking what is unnatural and making it natural. Okay, and I've highlighted two words there. One is process. And the reason why it's important to recognize that this is a process is because processes are inherently emotional. If you look at any sports movie, Rocky, Hoosiers, Karate Kid, what's going on during the training scene typically or always is that people are emotional. They want to quit. They get angry at the coach. You know, the Karate Kid gets angry at Mr. Miyagi. He's just fed up. Because I think as we talk about training our minds, we all have to anticipate that just like when you exercise physically, your body's trying to push out all these toxins. In the same way, I believe that happens emotionally. That when you endeavor to train, there is a process that is inevitably emotional. And the second word I highlighted is unnatural. That's why we're doing it, because the things that we want to have, we're not natural. We don't naturally have ripped abs, but training gets what is unnatural and makes it natural. Sports skills. You know, when you look at someone that goes, oh man, it's like second nature to them. Well, the reason we say second nature is because they weren't born knowing how to dribble a basketball or hit a baseball. Training is the process of taking what is unnatural and making it natural. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 7 says, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly. Luke 6 verse 40, a student is not above the teacher, but anyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Change happens when we train. Not when we cry, not when we complain, not just because you want it, right? Change happens because you train. Okay? I would say about myself that I am, by almost every metric, a very average person. However, on this topic of training, I have spent 20 years in ministry trying to teach younger men, younger women, and at times older men and older women how to think like a minister. It's training. And let me say this about training. If you aren't engaged in training, if you're not engaged in the process of training, you will be more susceptible to destructive emotions. Training provides a healthy outlet for many of our emotions. Emotions need an outlet, and in some cases it needs a purge. And what training does is it provides a sense of forward progress for us all. So I want to talk today about having a productive mind. In other words, and fighting against an unproductive mind. Here in 2 Peter chapter 1, Peter says, if you possess these qualities, and if you just read the verses before, he's talking about continuing to grow in your godliness. If you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Whoever doesn't have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting they have been cleansed from their past sins. He said, and I've highlighted this will keep you from being unproductive in your knowledge. And what that's insinuating is that knowledge can be unproductive. Knowledge can be unproductive. Being unproductive is not about your IQ. It's not about being underinformed. Okay? So many people that I know that are very intelligent people, and I'm sure many that you can think of, lead very underwhelming lives, to put it mildly. I've met people that are brilliant, but they're unable to contribute to a group in a groupthink. And the most obvious example of intelligence that is unproductive, the most obvious example that you and I can relate to, that we've been guilty of, and that we see all the time, is people that are argumentative. That's the most obvious example of intelligence that is unproductive. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14, Paul says, keep reminding, this is Paul saying to Timothy, keep reminding God's people of these things. Warn them before God against quarreling about words. It's of no value, and it only ruins those who listen. In this chapter of 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul warns Timothy 3 times against arguing. He says it's of no value. It ruins those who listen. So I want to ask us a question to think about. Do you want your intelligence to ruin others? Is that what we want our minds to accomplish? Well, of course not. But we've all been guilty of it. Because you and I both know that arguing is about winning. It's about one-upping. And it's about showing how smart we are. And the real issue that we run into that makes our knowledge unproductive is ego. I've got a great friend in the Detroit church named Nick Merkel. He works for Toyota. And one of the things he's got to do amongst all these engineers is he's got to manage all of the backbiting. And frankly, the engineer culture is known for just a bunch of brilliant guys that, backbite. But what Nick has to do is Nick has to go into situations and fix them. And he has to not worry about who's to blame. Because the answer to fixing problems is almost always unrelated to assessing blame and credit. Right? And so, how do we have a productive mindset? Well, simply, we have to value effectiveness over ego. Value effectiveness over ego. And that seems really simple and straightforward, and in some cases might even be obvious. But it's not that easy, right? And the reason why it's not that, the way you and I are wired to evaluate our lives. I mean, you think about how we are taught to evaluate. Education, house size, how good looking you are, your bank account. I mean, this is undeniably how we evaluate people. Oh, you're Dr. Chimmensworth, PhD and author. Your house is huge. Oh my gosh, look how charming and dashingly good looking you are. You're wealthy. And none of those things are inherently wrong. But they all have to do with ego. Here's what question we ought to ask of our minds and intelligence, okay? Is what I'm doing working? Let's take a second and ask this question in our marriage. You're so smart. So is what you're doing working? How about as a parent? Is what you're doing working? How about as a disciple maker? You've got all these theories on how the church should run, or you got all these theories on how your ministry should be run. Is what you're doing working? You're single. You know, I tell this to my boys. I said, boys chase girls, but men attract. Boys chase, men attract. So if you know what it means to be a stud, is what you're doing working? Is what you're doing working? These are the questions we need to start asking ourselves consistently if we want to have a productive mindset. Read here in James chapter 1. It says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." One clear indicator that your ego is getting in the way of a productive mindset is that we are consistently angry. Anger will not produce the righteousness that God desires. It won't produce it in your spouse. It won't produce it in yourself, your children, the people around you, your ministry. You know, anger, for the most part, I'd say 90% of the time when we are angry, it's a selfish anger. So what do we do about this? And one of the things that I gave a challenge on Monday was to get into the habit of meditation. To get in the habit of not just reading, 10 chapters a day, but to take a verse or two and to try and generate your own insight. Like I said, anybody can read a book and, just kind of steal and borrow the insight. And I think there's a lot of value in that. I read books all the time. I'm currently reading 3 books. And I think it's great, and I often share about books that I'm reading. But at some point, you have to be able to generate your own insight into the Word of God. And that only happens when you reflect and meditate. And so I want to challenge us to build a habit of meditation. How do I do that? Honestly, it just starts with buying a book. I'd say buy a journal. And when I started, I 5 years ago, and I would write stuff down, and what was my insight? That I tried to write one insight a day, and most of the stuff I wrote was junk. Some of the stuff I wrote was pretty elementary. I'd be like, oh yeah, but some of it was breakthrough stuff for me And it happened because I got into the habit of meditating on a verse or two. I shared on sort of this Monday morning that a friend, his father was a judge, and I asked, what do you look for in criminals to show that they're contrite? And he said, well, I look for them to be insightful about what they've done. I look for them to be insightful because insight can only happen when you've reflected on it. I'm studying the Bible right now with a friend named Luis. Great guy. We're studying with him and his wife, and they're an awesome family. He's got a big family, and one of the things that we're doing for our studies together is our challenge is, we're just studying out anger together. And my challenge is let's immerse ourselves in this topic and see what new insight that we can generate. Not just say the same things that we're supposed to, not just kind of regurgitate stuff. But I'm talking about this part when you're forced to marinate and insight happens. Breakthrough happens when you get insightful about your own sin. I got a ton of insight on other people's sin. I got a ton of insight on the people, like my brother's sin and my wife's sin and my kids' sin. We're so insightful about that. But breakthrough happens in our thinking when we get insightful about our own sin. And so my question to you is, you had a breakthrough insight about your own sin. So for the next couple lessons, I want to be talking about training our brains, getting in the process. There are so many scriptures that talk about how our minds need to change to become more and more godly, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy that. Let's close with a prayer, and I'll pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your love. We thank you so much for your fellowship, for your word. We know at this time, especially just during this crazy time where we're isolated, I pray that you would protect the hearts and the minds of the disciples, and that you would help us to train our hearts and our minds to be godly. I want to lift up to you the Charian family and the Tampin family, that you would bring them encouragement and comfort, and at this time where they mourn, help us as a church to just encourage them and hold up their arms to make them feel loved. I thank you for Angie Cobb, who's recovered from her illness and is doing better. And I want to lift up to you, God, the healthcare workers working so hard in the state of Michigan. Pray for the leadership in this state, this country, and the world, that they would make good and wise decisions to continue to move us forward. And I pray that you would quell this virus and all that it's doing, God, to hurt people. And God, please continue to bless your church, bless this city and the state. We love you. We pray all this in your son's name. Amen. Thanks, you guys. Hope that was encouraging, and I will see y'all on Sunday.